They said it was the perfect marriage. Everyone admired them. The pictures looked flawless. But behind her smile was a secret so devastating it would shatter 3 families, land someone in a hospital bed, and put another person behind bars. This is the true story of a woman who married for security, fell for the wrong man, and orchestrated a plan so shocking that even the detectives couldn't believe what they uncovered. By the end of this story, you'll question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the lies we tell ourselves. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story begins in a small town in Ohio, where a woman named Sarah grew up in a household that barely made ends meet. Her father had left when she was 7, and her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Sarah learned early that survival meant making smart choices, even if those choices didn't include happiness. She was beautiful, intelligent, and desperate for a life that didn't involve worrying about rent every month. When she met David at a charity event in Cleveland, she saw an opportunity. David was 42, a successful real estate developer, recently widowed, and looking for companionship. He wasn't looking for passion. He was looking for someone to share his life with, someone to fill the quiet spaces in his large, empty house. Sarah was 28. She didn't love him, but she convinced herself that love could grow. Her mother encouraged the relationship. Her friends told her she was lucky. And so, 6 months after they met, Sarah walked down the aisle in a beautiful white dress, smiled for the cameras, and became Mrs. David Harrison. But even on her wedding day, her eyes kept drifting to one person in the crowd. His name was Ryan, and he was David's nephew. Ryan was 29, charming, and full of life in a way that David wasn't. He worked in marketing, traveled often, and had the kind of smile that made people feel seen. Sarah had met him during the wedding planning, and from the very first conversation, there was a spark. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection. Ryan listened when she talked. He asked her questions about her dreams, her fears, her past. David, on the other hand, was kind but distant. He showered her with gifts and security, but he never asked her how she really felt. He assumed that because he provided for her, she would be happy. And for a while, Sarah tried to be. She decorated the house, attended his business dinners, played the role of the perfect wife. But every time Ryan came over for family gatherings, the loneliness inside her grew louder. She started looking forward to his visits. She started texting him about small things, like a funny movie she'd watched or a book she was reading. And Ryan always responded, always made her laugh, always made her feel like she mattered. 3 months into the marriage, David started traveling more for work. He'd be gone for days at a time, sometimes a full week. Sarah would sit in that big house alone, scrolling through her phone, feeling like she was disappearing. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. One evening, Ryan stopped by to drop off some documents for David. Sarah invited him in for coffee. They talked for hours. And when he finally stood up to leave, he looked at her in a way that made her heart race. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. A week later, he came by again. This time there were no documents, no excuse, just honesty. He told her he couldn't stop thinking about her. She told him she felt the same. And that night, they crossed a line that neither of them could uncross. What started as one mistake became a pattern. Ryan would visit when David was away. They'd meet at a small cafe outside of town where no one knew them. They'd text late at night, deleting the messages afterward. Sarah told herself it wasn't wrong because she never wanted to marry David in the first place. Ryan told himself it wasn't betrayal because David didn't truly love her. He just wanted a companion. But deep down, they both knew the truth. They were playing with fire, and someone was going to get burned. For 2 months, they managed to keep it hidden. But secrets like that don't stay buried for long. One afternoon, the housekeeper, a woman named Margaret who had worked for David for years, overheard a phone conversation. Sarah was in the bedroom, speaking in a low voice, laughing softly. Margaret heard a man's voice on the other end, but it wasn't David's. She didn't think much of it at first, until she noticed how often Ryan's car was parked down the street when David was out of town. Margaret didn't want to believe it, but her loyalty to David was stronger than her desire to stay silent. She mentioned it to David's sister Claire during a casual conversation. Claire was skeptical at first, but the more she thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit. Sarah's distant behavior at family dinners, Ryan's sudden interest in stopping by the house, the way they avoided eye contact when they were in the same room. Claire didn't confront them directly. Instead, she quietly started watching. And one evening, she saw them together at a restaurant 2 towns over, holding hands across the table. Claire didn't tell David right away. She wanted proof. She wanted to be sure before she destroyed her brother's world. But she didn't need to wait long. 2 weeks later, David came home early from a business trip. He was exhausted and just wanted to surprise Sarah with dinner. When he pulled into the driveway, he noticed Ryan's car parked a block away. His stomach dropped. He walked into the house quietly, and what he saw confirmed his worst fear. Sarah and Ryan were sitting on the couch, close, her head on his shoulder. The moment David stepped into the room, everything stopped. Ryan stood up immediately, stammering an apology. Sarah's face went pale. David didn't yell at first. He just stood there, staring at the 2 people he trusted most, trying to process the betrayal. Then, in a voice shaking with pain, he asked the only question that mattered. "How long?" Sarah couldn't answer. Ryan looked at the floor, and in that silence, David's heart shattered into pieces he knew he'd never be able to put back together. The next few hours were chaos. David demanded answers. Sarah tried to explain, tried to tell him she never meant to hurt him, but every word felt hollow. Ryan tried to apologize, but David didn't want to hear it. He told Ryan to get out, to never come near his house again. Ryan left, but the damage was already done. That night, Sarah packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. David sat alone in the dark, replaying every moment of their marriage, wondering how he'd missed the signs. How could the woman he'd given everything to betray him with his own nephew? How could Ryan, someone he'd mentored and loved like a son, stab him in the back? The pain was unbearable, but worse than the pain was the humiliation. Within days, the whole family knew. Whispers spread through their social circle. People who once smiled at Sarah now looked at her with disgust. Ryan was disowned by most of the family. His mother, David's sister, refused to speak to him. And David, the man who'd always been composed and controlled, was falling apart. But this story doesn't end with a broken marriage and shattered relationships. It gets much, much worse. 3 weeks after the confrontation, David invited Ryan to the house. He said he wanted to talk, to try to understand, maybe even to forgive. Ryan, desperate for any chance at redemption, agreed. But when Ryan arrived that night, David wasn't looking for understanding. He was looking for answers he'd never get. The conversation quickly turned into an argument. Voices were raised. Accusations were thrown. And then, in a moment of rage and grief, David shoved Ryan. Ryan stumbled backward, lost his balance, and fell down the staircase. The sound of his body hitting the steps echoed through the house. David froze. Ryan lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs, blood pooling beneath his head. David called 911, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. When the paramedics arrived, Ryan was still breathing, but barely. He was rushed to the hospital with a severe head injury and a fractured spine. The police arrived shortly after, and David was taken in for questioning. At first, David claimed it was an accident. He said they were arguing. Things got heated, and Ryan fell. But the detectives weren't convinced. The angle of the fall, the force of the impact, the nature of Ryan's injuries. All of it suggested something more than a simple accident. Sarah was brought in for questioning too. She was devastated, torn between guilt and fear. She admitted to the affair, admitted that she and Ryan had been planning to leave together, but she insisted that David wasn't violent, that he would never intentionally hurt anyone. But then the detectives found something that changed everything. Text messages between Sarah and Ryan. Messages they thought they'd deleted. Messages that revealed the affair wasn't just about love. It was about money. Sarah and Ryan had been planning to run away together, and they'd been plotting to take a significant portion of David's assets with them. They'd discussed forging documents, accessing joint accounts, even manipulating David into signing over property. What had seemed like a tragic love story was actually a calculated scheme. Sarah wasn't just a lonely wife who'd fallen for the wrong man. She was a manipulator who'd seen an opportunity and taken it. The trial was brutal. Prosecutors painted Sarah as a gold digger who'd married David for his money and seduced his nephew to help her steal it. They argued that when David discovered the affair, Sarah and Ryan had panicked and that the fall wasn't an accident at all. They suggested that David, in a moment of betrayal and rage, had pushed Ryan with the intent to harm. David's defense team argued that it was a tragic accident, that David had been emotionally devastated, and that the push was a reflexive reaction, not a premeditated attack. Ryan, who had survived but suffered permanent injuries, testified from a wheelchair. He admitted to the affair, admitted to the plan to take David's money, and admitted that he and Sarah had manipulated the situation. But he also said that David had pushed him intentionally, that the look in David's eyes that night was one of pure rage. Sarah took the stand, too. She cried as she confessed to the affair, to the lies, to the betrayal. She said she never loved David, that she'd married him out of desperation, and that Ryan was the only person who'd ever made her feel truly alive. But she also admitted that the plan to take David's money was real, that she and Ryan had convinced themselves it was justified because David had never truly loved her anyway. The courtroom was silent as Sarah read a letter she'd written to David before her sentencing. In it, she admitted that she'd been selfish, that she'd hurt an innocent man who'd done nothing but try to give her a better life. She said that she did love Ryan, but only because David had never truly seen her, never asked her what she wanted, never made her feel like more than a trophy. She ended the letter with a line that would haunt everyone who heard it. If love means destroying others, maybe I never knew love at all. The judge handed down the sentences. David was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. Sarah was convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and received 4 years. Ryan, though a victim of the assault, was also charged with conspiracy and given probation along with a permanent criminal record. 3 lives were destroyed. 3 families were torn apart. And all because of a marriage built on lies, an affair born out of loneliness, and a desperate plan that spiraled out of control. So now I want to ask you, where do you stand on this? Was Sarah a victim of circumstance? A young woman trapped in a loveless marriage who made terrible choices out of desperation? Or was she a manipulator who saw an opportunity and exploited a kind man's generosity? What about David? Was he a heartbroken husband who lost control in a moment of unimaginable pain, or was he a man who let his rage turn him into something he never thought he could be? And Ryan, was he a man genuinely in love, or just another opportunist who justified betrayal because he wanted what his uncle had? Think about it honestly. If you were in Sarah's position, trapped in a marriage without love, would you have had the courage to leave? Or would you have looked for comfort in the wrong places? If you were David, and you discovered that the person you trusted most had been lying to you, plotting against you, would you have been able to walk away, or would the pain have consumed you too? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me who you think was most at fault. Tell me if you think any of them deserved forgiveness, or if justice was the only answer. And if this story shocked you, wait until you hear what we have coming next. A bride who exposed her husband and her best friend on their wedding day in front of 200 guests. You won't believe what she did. Subscribe so you don't miss it. because these real-life stories will leave you speechless.